So take me kind of back to the beginning. Like I discovered you, when this book came out, but before all this, like what kind of got you into writing and blogging in general?
I probably I started tweeting like as soon as tweeting was a thing. My first real project was probably a blog called Evergreen, like 2014-ish. And I was just trying to learn. I just, I was working in this like crazy Silicon Valley startup and everybody felt smart and was using all this jargon. And I was just trying to understand how it all worked. So I'd send out an email to this little list of friends and be like, I'm trying to understand network effects. Like, send me the best resource you've ever encountered on network effects. And I would get a bunch of stuff back, and then I would consume it all in a week. And then over the weekend, I'd write like a quick summary of what I understood and link back to the original stuff. And it grew like crazy. And I was like, this is really cool, man. I'm learning and I'm sharing with people and I'm having fun. And this is like my kind of self-assessed MBA. Um, and that really gave me the sense that the confidence that if I did great work and I put it out on the internet, like good things would happen. Like the meritocracy of internet writing was real. Um, and that, I mean, that has kind of propelled me since then. Like there's a lot of good stuff out there, but I've always been a reader. And I was like, busy writing crappy novels as a kid on rainy days and stuff like that. So I don't think anybody in my family would have been surprised at what happened here.
I think a lot about like force multipliers, like that thing you were doing, you're learning it because you're teaching it, you're learning it better than most. You're not just skimming over parts. You're also kind of providing this value there. And some of it's just like maybe borrowed authority. Anything from that you kind of took through to the rest of your career? Like how do you think about some of those things?
Borrowed authority is an interesting term. I don't know how people think about it, but if there's a theme, I mean, like the theme from between Evergreen and my books is honestly like curation is creation. There's this like false god of originality that I just like don't buy. And I don't know if I don't buy it because I like stumbled into this awesome kind of niche as a like curator editor, but I have no problem being very front and center about the fact that like this other person who's really smart said this thing and I learned from it and I'm happy to share it with you. And the Evergreen blog was that very explicitly. It was like, here's a paragraph from Charlie Munger. Here's what I learned from it, or here's my connection to what Nassim Taleb said, or here's where that conflicts with this other thing that I thought I knew. And, if that's borrowed authority or that's curation, um, I just find it so much easier to write when I'm reacting to something or complimenting something or rephrasing it or respecting it. And I have no problem being like extremely upfront with the reader about that. And respecting curation as a form of writing is maybe what unlocked this opportunity of these books. Like these books are not written. Like I'm not sitting down with a blank page and generating content. Every word of this book came from an existing resource from Naval or from Balaji that I'm like a super editor. I'm like trying to find the best of everything they've ever said and stitch it together and mold it and turn it into something great. But I don't give myself the freedom to rewrite anything that they've done. I just try to build something great out of the pieces in front of me. And I think that's, I don't know if it's a different skill than writing. I don't know if it's harder. I don't know if it's easier. Different people, it probably comes naturally to different, but I certainly respect it as a craft. And I think it's made me a better writer. It's given me permission to do shitty first drafts and then edit my own work. Um, and I think to some people who maybe struggle with pushing themselves towards originality or with just getting that first draft done, like I say, don't shy away from using raw material that exists or reacting to something that's out there or borrowing heavily, from something and making that your source material.
It seems like in a very practical sense, like I started writing some stuff on Medium. If I write about someone that they know and they don't know me, they're going to read the article, like at the very least.
Yes.
And you're kind of creating a form of trust around you. So when you do have something to say, they're more likely to listen to it.
I think that's true. I think you see that in podcast guests and you see that in movies and you see that, like you may not be familiar with a director but you know the star, or you may know the director, but you don't know the storyline. Like, um, I think there's something to that. Like you want like a lily pad of familiarity to some extent with to get someone on board with something new that you're creating. Um, I don't know. I find it more fun and like enjoyable, and it just feels more like playing with Legos than doing something else. And like that's just the analogy that comes up for me. As I think about creating original work, I still do the same thing, right? Like I'm gonna borrow this story structure. I'm gonna borrow this character inspiration, or this type, or this the heist format, or something like that. And when you see those pieces, you see how few things there's how many things are just combinations of the underlying components.
Did you meet Naval through your Twitter and some of those things, or is it more about you showed up wanting to do this plan and your leverage was hard work and effort putting into collecting it? How did that kind of all come together?
There was never really this like, hey, I've got an idea to pitch you moment. Like this is such a happy accident. Like I was listening to Naval's interview on the Knowledge Project. It was an incredible podcast. I'd listened to it maybe 3 times over the course of 2 weeks, and I just was like, this is an incredible podcast. There is timeless wisdom in here. This has unlocked so much for me. And I think it's such a shame that this wisdom is buried in this unsearchable, like unarchived, like potentially very ephemeral format that so many people won't get access to. And as somebody who's like spent my career, one, curating things like back from the Evergreen blog, and two, I love Charlie Munger. Some of my favorite books are compilations of Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett's ideas that came from the shareholder letters or that came from their meetings. And so I was familiar with the concept of a book of compilations and quotes. And I was just like, well, maybe there's like something here. And I tweeted this random idea. It was a bad pun title. I was like, would you read the book of Knowledge? Like a quick compilation of just like all these different great quotes from all Naval's different work. And I'd been following him for 10 years. I learned a ton from him, respected him for a long time. And tweeted this, went to bed, didn't think about it, woke up and found that Naval had retweeted it, and 5,000 people were like, oh my God, yes, please do this. And Naval had replied and said, like, I'm happy to provide whatever you need, like, go for it. And I kind of went from like, oh shit, I thought this was gonna be a 3-month like side project, to, oh my God, I just like got permission to write the next Port Charlie's Almanack. Like I better really deeply respect this. And so it ended up being like a 3-year project to like get everything categorized and meticulous and thread it together and get peer readers to review it. And just like the scope creep when I know that, when I knew that Naval was paying attention to it, and when I knew I wanted to produce something that was worthy of the rest of his work and his legacy and his what he puts out into the world. And I wanted it to be something that he would be proud to be associated with. And it just raised my bar so much. One of my new phrases as a result of that experience is, everyone's a perfectionist when they get enough skin in the game. And like the reflex to like remove yourself from high skin in the game situations, is like that fear that you won't make it good enough. And I didn't have an option. Naval was paying attention to this project from the second I tweeted about it. And that really changed my relationship to it. And I was like, I will publish this. It will get published. I do not know when. I will give myself as much time as I need. I have a fixed bar on quality. It will be exceptional. I don't care if it takes 1 year, 3 years, or 5 years, but like it will be perfect by the time it goes out. And I think, in a world where books and movies and companies and everything have this power law where like only the top 1% drive the majority of the outcomes, like that putting yourself in situations where you are going to become that much of a perfectionist like matters a lot. There's a lot to be said for generating volume, but when you've got something that really, really matters and you just agonize over the craft of it, I think that's where people really surprise themselves.
Do you think, I mean, in this case, it's a little different. Like you sort of need a green light, permission wise, some of those things. But as far as like writing a book with effort, like Alex Hormozy has a thing about put in 20x the effort, you may receive 1,000x the results. Do you
Yeah.
think you can do that intrinsically, or do you need, feedback from someone else, accountability? How do you think about some of those things?
Depends who you are, I think. Know thyself, like I think some people are certainly like capable of like high degrees of self-masochism and just like can get themselves there by dint of their personality or upbringing or who they are and how they work. Um, some people benefit from a new context. And I think that was me, right? Like I'm very much a like 80-20, the input output kind of guy. Like I'd rather move fast, get a good return on my time and keep going. And this project was one of the first times in my life, I think, or certainly one of the most extreme examples in my life where I was like, I will become a perfectionist for this project in this moment, in this context. And I'm blown away by the results. And it's changed how I approach, a lot of my other projects now. It makes it a little easier to triage of like, I mean, I could half-ass that, but if I half-ass it, it's not going to be what I want it to be anyway. So I may as well just like not ass it at all and like whole-ass this other thing instead.
I saw some things like you don't have time to do it right when you have time to do it again, and I try to think about that with like smaller things. What
Yeah.
changed in that 3-year process for you? So I use Ryan Holiday's commonplace system. I use actual note cards, stuff like that. What
Mm,
changed about your research in that 3 years of working on this book?
man, I don't know. My tools are not sophisticated. I just use Google Docs a lot. I use a lot of Google Docs and some Otter for like some transcription stuff. Um, it definitely, having been all the way through the book publishing process the first time, helped a lot to go through it the second. Just knowing what steps were coming for me. Like the first time I was writing a book, I did multiple passes where I agonized on grammar and specific word choice and technical correctness. And then the second time around, I knowing that I was going to go through a copy editing phase and a proofreading phase as part of the normal, my publishing process through Scribe, I was like, I'm not going to sweat the commas at all. I'm just going to do something that feels great. And I sweat the word choices and I sweat how it feels to the reader, sentence by sentence. But I gave zero concerns to formatting, zero concerns to grammatical correctness because it's not my strength and it's not my passion. And I just was a lot more efficient with where I put my energy and my attention the second time around. I was able to do faster revisions, more confident revisions. I knew kind of what it felt like to do the work at the right level. I didn't agonize over like, oh, am I allowed to change the sentence structure from like, ABA to AAB? And I was like, it worked the first time. It was fine. Nobody's mad. Nobody's paying that close of attention. Like it reads better. I'm just going to do it. I know I can do that now. And I think, that comes for everybody probably at different times, but it's certainly, yeah, less worry, more confidence is probably the biggest thing, more so than any particular process. Big process change. I was a little more organized because I knew a little bit more about, I had to think a little bit less about like the formatting and the tools I was going to use and what was going to come next. But
So I'm teaching like a half a dozen writers how to write their first books right now. Where we're talking about this book called The Now Habit, and there's a thing in there, Dr. Neil Fiore. There's an idea in there that you're not lazy, but that you're probably worrying about criticism, bad feedback, or perfectionism. Now, you've already admitted you're trying to make the book perfect. So, in those moments, how did you get past some of that?
I remembered that there are future moments, and I just became willing to punt decisions. I think there's a tension, yeah, between that. I think it's helpful to have the tension of the truth of like I will make this as perfect as I can, but someday it must get published. And I knew that I couldn't over perfectionist it, but I also knew that I was running. I felt myself slowing down at the rate of changes. The previously, well, there's a few indications I had that I was like getting the asymptote of like good enough, like getting close to perfect. Is like I would put it down for 2 weeks, I'd come back and pick it up, and it'd be better than I remembered. Like that was a big shift, and that was I was like, oh, I went from like 90% done to like 99+% done when I started to feel like, damn, who wrote this? Like this is good. Did I do this? Like 3 years of my past self did. It's like now I've got some more confidence to be like, okay, I'm putting this out there. The other is just, yeah, you just sparser and sparser marks on the page as you go through. I benefited a lot from going back and forth between mediums. So when I felt stuck on the computer, I'd print it out, I'd go through with a red pen, and that would give me some progress again. And just, I just kept kind of going back and forth between different types of work. And eventually I'm like, man, slowing out. Like I'm running out of ideas now. And then sometimes you turn to peer readers, or you just kind of go to the publisher and be like, I think this is ready. Is this ready? Like, and they're experts at this, and they'll read it and they'll say like, yes, it's ready. Congratulations. Or yes, it's ready, but you need a line edit. And especially that first book, a line editor was the best money I've ever spent. Oh my God, man. I like the stuff I was stuck on that I just never, ever would have seen because I've been reading it for too long. And the help that person was able to provide. And it was really helpful to me is like, they were very clear. It's like, you are in control of all these edits. You don't have to make any edits you don't want, but we're going to suggest everything that we can think of to make this book better. And probably 9 out of 10 I took, but the one out of 10 like felt important to me to keep for some character reason or voice reason or something like that. And I don't know, everybody finds their own balance with it, but those are some of the indicators that I felt when I was trying to kind of work through those tensions.
Are there things changing? So I wrote a book like 2 years ago, and I get my information from everywhere. Some I get from other books, some I get from quotes, podcasts, Instagram, wherever it comes from. Do you feel like some of the MLA stuff is kind of changing in the technicality of the way things are written because if it's a book, I'm probably going to say the name of the book, but if it's not, I might be a little more open with, did they write it? Did they say it? Whatever it is,
I'm just I cede all of those decisions to somebody who is very careful about those details, but they get confused. They're like, this came from a podcast, but it was shared on YouTube, and that's the only link I can find. I don't know how to cite a YouTube video. I'm like, me neither, but like, just do your best. Like, I'm okay. I don't stress about that, the MLA formatting very much. Like to me, and I come into this from a reader's, like, I didn't come from a program. I didn't study English. I loved books and I loved reading, but I'm not like I'm not like a librarian type. If that is an archetype, like that's not me. I care so deeply that the reader has a good experience. I don't give a shit about the literal technical correctness of the grammar, of the citations, I just want the reader to have a great experience.
So one thing I noticed, so using to elaborate for listeners, like the Ryan Holiday method is a series of note cards. Sometimes I'm just writing notes and I'm just trying to connect quote A to quote B. But for me, and I imagine especially in this case, doing that kind of raises your level of writing. Was that your experience about just the pieces that weren't, Naval quotes?
So literally everything in that book is a Naval quote. Every word. I don't use note cards. And I'd actually be curious to hear I want to ask you a question about the handwriting piece in a second. But to me, it's like a big jigsaw puzzle, and I just try to put the pieces together in a bunch of different ways. And it helps to have big blocks of time that you can allocate to that, because you kind of have to load, to your point on quote A, quote B, quote C, quote D, you have to like load that into your head. And then sometimes your subconscious is just like chewing on it, and you get a shower thought and you're like, oh, actually A goes with D and D leads into B, and like maybe I should try that. And it just takes having all that in your head to make those connections. And I do think, there's a lot of quote compilation books out there, and it's very rare that any of them resonate with people the way this book has. And I think that's a testament to like creating that thread of ideas and creating a structure around them and making something really useful for readers as a reference and as an experience that feels like a conversation where each idea sort of either builds on or answers or expands the idea before it. Really pulls people through. And there were people who, this book just launched this week as we're recording this, and there are people who started tweeting threads about the book the day that it launched. And some of the podcasts I did, the podcaster was like, I literally read this book in one night. And I think that's a testament to the thread of ideas and the conversational tone that like keeps pulling you through, and that just sanding and polishing all those edges and the seams between ideas so that they flow really, really matters from a reader's perspective.
Do you think that made a difference? That is really interesting. So, I'm writing books, and I'm also working on a documentary, and it's very
Mm,
different with reading things the way they're like if Naval sit down to write this book, it may be different than this book because you write different than you speak. What was your kind
yeah.
of take on that? You said you had to do a few tweaks, but what was the big picture take on that?
It's very interesting when you look at a transcript at first. Like raw transcripts read like shit. And you look at it and you're like, there's no way. Like this is the worst kind of writing. This is impossible. But if you if you take some like pretty aggressive editing hammer, like if you take some liberties to structure that into something nice, what you end up with is something that reads like the best form of writing to me, which is conversational. Um, it's very easy, for whatever reason, when writers sit down to write, to over intellectualize, to extrapolate, to slow down, to explain things that don't need to be explained, to just generally fuck up the flow of a thought. And as a reader, to interact with a book is can be really intimate and really powerful if it feels conversational, if it feels personal. And I think that that's way more achievable when you start with something that was literally a conversation. Like a lot of what became the Almanack and Naval were his clubhouse recordings or his podcast recordings, where it is a dialogue, it's an interview, it's a one-to-one conversation. And when that tone, the casualness of it, the clarity of it, um, the cadence of it makes its way into a book, as you're reading it, you're hearing it, you feel like you're having this conversation. It is, I think it's much more engaging, honestly, than something that's like written like a writer. And the best books to me and the best writers have these like strong voices and tones that stick in your head. Chuck Palahniuk, like Tucker Max, that stick out. Like you're reading a book by one of those people, um, and it feels like a conversation and pulls you into it. And I hope that these kind of do the same and just engage something primal in you that's like feels like you're there sitting across the table from this person. You're your best self. They're their best self. They're presenting all their most important ideas to you as succinctly and clearly as they can. Like I want to simulate a one-on-one dinner with your heroes, with some of the wisest people alive. Like that's what I want these books to feel like. And when you come from a conversational source material, I think that's much easier to achieve.
Does it feel like this hit or these hit at the perfect moment? Because you mentioned Otter AI, but that's really just a transcript. But we're right on the peak of everything's crazy. I mean, does it feel like we're going to get to a point where a podcast host could click a button and they turn out something similar like this, or is there a human touch that you think? Like, what are your thoughts on that now?
In this moment, I still feel like there's a human touch. I mess around with some of the ChatGPT stuff, like in starting to do this. And for the process that I use, it's not particularly helpful. It's just, it's great at that. It maybe can do that first 90%, but it kind of changes stuff it's not supposed to change. And it's just like, I'm a very techno progressive utopian kind of guy. Like that's the theme of this most recent book. Like I love using the best tools available for stuff. It just and it might help with some of the info management, but it's just not. It does not do curation well yet, at least in the modes that I've used it. And I don't have a black belt in GPT prompts or anything, so like it's very possible someone smarter than me could do it well. Um, I do think, and the tools that I'm seeing on the more writing and publishing and like as a brainstorming partner and like the AI voice cloning stuff, like there's some really cool stuff coming. Gotten some demos of things that are like, you upload an hour of narrated voice and you can create a voice clone that can do anything. It can regenerate. It can be giving creative direction. It can be translated into other language. You could have my voice speaking Chinese, a language that I don't even begin to speak, like driven through AI. There's some incredible stuff coming. I think in general that value will accrue, like the power law will continue. That value will accrue to the best writers who have that human touch, who lean into using the tools to improve their output or increase their output. And it might, put out of business some of the, like, I'm going to say, like, cognitive day laborers who do not put soul into their writing, but are just hired to execute a task at a low budget for a thing that they don't care about. I don't know, like a Hallmark movie is like probably an unfair example that I'm going to use, but like, um, some of that stuff may get replaced, or largely supplemented by new incoming AI stuff. And I think for the species, that's a great thing. For some people, that might mean temporary unemployment for. That's very annoying. But um, I always kind of err on the side of the greater good and encourage people to lean into using new tools or self-educating in a new direction, or figuring that out. Like, you are more than your current form of employment. So like, please, please allow technology to evolve, and don't feel the need to pick up a picket sign and go on strike because someone invented something new and cool that's going to help humanity.
Going back to those 3 years, what changed for you in terms of personal growth? Like, just spending 3 years kind of in the mind of Naval and translating these things. Like, I imagine a lot of systems came out of that, but what are some
Oh my
other
god, yeah.
benefits?
When I wrote the book on Naval, I had no idea anybody was going to give a shit. Like, I would have been very happy if I just spent 3 years marinating in his wisdom and building this mental model of him that I could feel like I could really have a conversation with and install his ideas into my head. Like, if the only reward for this was understanding him and his ideas, like, it would have been plenty. Um, I use the analogy, like, I feel like I built a Hogwarts portrait of him in my head, so like I can go have a conversation with that portrait and like get some advice, and I understand. I think, it's certainly not him, but I understand a lot of how he analyzes things and how he thinks and what he thinks is important and how he sees the world. And that's given me both some happiness and some peace and some new habits. But also, I think maybe, a more effective CEO, a more effective investor, a better writer, better podcaster, um, all of those things. I mean, it's hard at this point to separate like what is me and what is the growth that came from spending that much time, because I was like adopted those ideas so aggressively. There's been an incredible number of good outcomes in my life just from having the book out there, right? Like, you know, I started a venture fund, started a podcast, wrote a second and third book, and became CEO of this publishing company that published that first book. All of that you could pretty much trace directly back to the outcome of that book. And that's before we talk about like the actual financial impact of the book on my life, which was life changing. Um, so it's been, I owe, almost all of the positive things in my life in this moment, I think, to the work that went into the book and the second and third order effects of that book being out in the world. Has been an absolutely transformative thing for me. The creation process and the outcomes, in the world, and the people that I've met because of it, the conversations I've been able to have, is absolutely incredible. This book as a bat signal to like my kind of people has been like incredibly effective, and it's very difficult um, to appreciate the full force of that until you feel it. It's incredible.
Yeah, because I don't know, it's hard to think of how to use an algorithm to find really deep thinkers. Like, it's not like a category of something like that.
Yeah, and
What
that goes back to your point on like borrowed credibility. Was it
Yeah,
like,
Port
right?
Authority, yeah,
Some
yeah,
borrowed authority. Yeah, I mean, some of my best friends in life I met as a result of being like in my 20s and loving Charlie Munger. Like, if you go to a Charlie Munger like Daily Journal meeting or a Berkshire meeting, and there's like a lot of old guys in pleated khakis and like 3 20-year-olds, and the 20-year-olds go introduce each other. And like, if you are that kind of person with the level of like chutzpah to go to that meeting because you're that passionate about that individual person who you respect so much, it's an incredible filter for your kind of people. And Naval has been the same way. I don't disagree with Naval about much, and I'm very proud to have sort of written that book. And almost everybody who it resonates with, I'm excited to meet, because if they love that book that much, then they're probably my kind of people.
back in the day, they really only had the shareholders note. There wasn't a ton of information. They had to suck
Yeah.
everything out of this kinda note. What has changed for you in terms of like the amount of information? It seems like you've kind of become an expert in taking a ton of stuff and compiling it down to the nuts and bolts. I know it's kind of hard to even ask the question, but like, where do you begin with some of those things? How do you start to break them up categorically?
Yeah, I think the most helpful thing to know is that it's emergent. And so I like so the third. Well, I'll use the Balaji example. Like when you start, you get a new person and you just build a giant ass database of all the stuff they've ever done. It's a little. You just start consuming it all, and you start selecting pieces that really resonate with you. And at first there's only one bucket. There's just like shit I like, and then over time you're like, oh man, there's been a lot of stuff about the media. I'm gonna make a media bucket, and then like you've got a few more, and you're like, oh, there's a lot of stuff about. This is all his startup advice. Okay, startup advice, and then startup advice turns into, you split off hiring and managing and ideating and growing a company, or um, how do you validate an idea, and like the buckets just sort of emerge and merge back together, and it's just this organic process of like trying to trying to organize and separate with increasing fidelity, and then ordering them both like kind of the macro buckets and each individual idea within them, and the sub buckets which turn into chapters of just like how do you set these ideas up so that they build on each other, so you can take someone who's new through this logical progression of like, oh, that's a good idea. Well, I wonder, oh, that answers it. Oh, that's next. Oh, that's next. And something, another answer to your question about what changed between kind of book one and two is like, you get way better at figuring out what to preemptively cut, like what to ignore before you even pull it in. You get a little more confident in your taste, I guess. That first book. So in working on the Naval book, my first version of that book, the first manuscript, was like 600 pages. It was enormous. It was 150,000 words or something. It was truly enormous. And in my head, I was making Pork Charlie's Almanack, which is a behemoth of a book. It's a coffee table book. It's 400 pages. And so I sent that first version to peer readers, and I was like, "What do you think, guys?" And then I got on calls with them, and they were like, to a person, every single one of them was like, there was some great stuff in there, but I gotta be honest, I did not read the whole thing. I didn't make it more than halfway. I didn't like. I gave up. I ignored that section entirely. And I was like, okay, good feedback, good feedback, good feedback. I wanted to tighten it up a lot, and that process taught me that going into that second book, like I just preemptively cut. So I knew so many roads to not even go down, because I was like, well, that's going to be the whole section that I end up cutting in 6 months after I put 200 hours into it. So I'm not even going to start with you. And that I don't have an answer for that other than reps. And sometimes you have to go down those paths to know they're not what you want to include, but a little bit of increasing sort of confidence in your taste and experience exploring that maze, finding dead ends, and understanding what it feels like to kind of know that you're walking that main path, and having a clear sense of what the final product is like helps very much. Some people set out to write a 150,000 word book, and some people set out to write a 50,000 word book. And I think the fact that I ended up bounced off, 100, 150, and then cut down to 50 made it a really, really rich, dense, nutritious thing that, when people say like, I have a highlight on every page, I dog-eared I can't put the pencil down. Like, I love to hear that. And that to me feels like I delivered on a really good use of time for the reader, like back to the reader experience. They're like, I want to reread it because I feel like I didn't glean everything from it the first time, or it was such a good use of time. I want to remind myself of it in 6 months or in a year. And those are good things. And I think it comes from, making a big soup and then like boiling it down and making it more and more concentrated.
Actually, when I read it, I read straight through it, and I usually make a ton of notes, and I didn't because I knew I was just gonna have to refer back to it like over and over. I was like, "There's no, I'm not gonna highlight the whole book." Um,
I'll take that. Yeah.
yeah. How do you think about? So I've interviewed Jonathan Eig wrote the giant Muhammad Ali biography.
Mm.
So there's a difference in like a biography and a memoir, and that's I'm trying to help people understand that. Like focus on some kind of theme or something like that. When you're going from 150 to 50 with this book, are you thinking of like, is it just the big categories? Is it like how to solve problems for people? Like in marketing, I tell people health, wealth, relationships. Like, did you kind of lean into this a guide to wealth and happiness? Like, did that help you also the bigger umbrella, I guess?
Yeah, the in having those conversations with kind of those peer readers or beta readers or whatever you want to call them. I mean, it is no surprise that the things that were universally appreciated were about wealth and about happiness. Like, go figure, right? Everybody wants to be rich and happy. Um, I mean, some of the other sections were ideas like investing. It's like, if you are into investing, fascinating. If you're not into investing, skip the whole section. They're not going to, like, people aren't going to read it. It's a very skippable thing. Um, Education. I found that one deeply fascinating. I wish everyone cared about it. Not everybody cares about it. That's okay. Um, and so some of them were very easy decisions on, like, no sweat to cut out, in 2019 to cut out a blockchain section from a book on wealth and happiness. Like, Naval has brilliant ideas. Certainly not everybody's going to care about it right now. That's okay. Um, and I actually agonized over it for a while until I had the incredibly obvious insight that I can just put all that stuff on the website. I can still give it away. People are still going to read it. It'll still be great for SEO or the readers who want to go dive deeper. It doesn't have to get bundled and printed and shipped with the wealth and happiness sections, which are pretty close to universally appealing. I genuinely believe anybody on earth who speaks English can pick this book up and get something useful to apply to their lives immediately from it. And diluting that with stuff that I think is cool and important, like blockchain and education, doesn't serve the reader. It doesn't really help them, and I'm shoving it down their throat. Um, this is the closest thing that I have, and I tell every author that I work with at Scribe about this. Is the stupidest, simplest, so obvious you can't believe it thing that I think is the secret, the closest thing I have to the secret of this book's success. People do not recommend books that they don't finish. They're just too chicken shit to be like, you read this book, you're going to love it. And then somebody else reads it and comes back to like, what did you think of that last chapter? And like, oh, I didn't finish it. Like, your gut tightens up when you think about it, and it's just embarrassing. And we just don't do it. It doesn't happen. And I don't know how to like sell books to millions of people. I only know how to write a book that people sell to each other, and people only sell books to each other when they finish them and when they love them and when they wish they were longer. And it's painful to cut from 100,000 words down to 50,000 words and to feel like you're, leaving beautiful stuff, hidden on a website or on the cutting room floor. But if people don't finish your book, they're not going to recommend it to their friends. If they don't recommend it to their friends, that beautiful wave of growth and stuff is never going to come for that book. There are exceptions that prove the rule, I think. Like, the polar opposite version is like Robert Caro, Chantaran, like Infinite Jest, 1,000-page books that when people finish it, they won't shut up about it because they're so proud of themselves for finishing this behemoth of a book, right? So the other extreme, I think, also works in a very different way. But there's a tough middle ground where, like, you wrote a 120,000 word book that's not that rich and dense. It doesn't have to be 120,000 words, and not that many people do finish it. And if they don't finish it, they don't recommend it, and it just kind of peters out. So that's something I coach authors on often, is like, please, like, make a book that is finishable. Like, you so much more badly want someone to wish a book was longer than wish it was shorter, because if they wish it was shorter, your reach, your impact is just going to be so much less. Get your core message through, get it done, leave them with some energy to go look at your website, go look you up, go listen to a podcast about you, like, look forward to your second book, right? Like, leave them wanting more.
Yeah, it's kind of, and that's, I think Jerry Seinfeld said, if you say it's too long or too short, what you mean is it's good or bad. Like there's an underlying
Yeah.
impression of that. So, well, okay. So
Yeah.
let's, at what point, so you kind of got the green light on Twitter, you're doing 3 years of research. Where in that did you go to Scribe? When did you and why did you go to Scribe?
Yeah, this is another, I mean, a testament to building in public to some extent, which I think my whole career is in some form. I remember tweeting, I think I've got a manuscript, my first draft of a manuscript done for the Almanack and Naval. And I was wrong. Like I did not, there's a lot of work left to do on that manuscript, but I tweeted it. And it felt good to tweet, and I was proud of myself for reaching that milestone. And I got some congrats and some people who were excited, and it's another way to keep me motivated. But one of the people who reached out to me was Tucker Max, who I've been reading since I was a teenager. I always thought he had an incredible voice, and he really did some pioneering stuff in how he published his books. And he was a very early successful sort of blog to author transition. And he'd been reading my Evergreen blog that I talked about earlier. And so we've been kind of brainstorming about, random business topics. I had never met him. We'd just been DMing, and he reached out and said, "Hey, what's the deal with this? Like, let me know if I can help you publish it or navigate publishing or whatever." So we got on the phone for 20, 30 minutes, and he just kind of walked me through the options. He's like, here's what you got. Like, traditional publishing is going to be tough because these are just like, it's a weird format, and like we don't know if the audience is going to be there, but like you definitely have fans of Naval, and Naval's giving you this permission, and that's awesome. And he's like, why don't you, like, if you bring it into Scribe, let's see what we can do. This is like what we do. We publish manuscripts for authors at a very incredibly high quality, like world class level that will look and feel and taste like a traditionally published book. Readers won't have any sense that there's a difference, but you will have all the creative control, and you will have all the financial upside of the book. And one of the conditions from Naval for me working on this project, which turned out to be a huge blessing, and I was happy to do it regardless, was make the digital versions available for free. All the digital versions distributed globally, no strings attached on the website. And I've done that for the Anthology of Balaji also. And I was like, look, a traditional publisher is not going to touch that concept with a 10-foot pole, right? Like that, like no way. I think it's actually helped us sell a ton more books, and I feel like it's done a lot for humanity. And I love seeing photos of people who've reading this thing in a remote village in India, or they just like printed it out themselves. Like that actually makes me happy because the ideas are reaching more places. But anyway, Tucker took me through he's like, we will ingest this manuscript. We will give it a copy edit. We'll give it a proofread. We'll give you some options for cover design and page layout, and we'll help you get it distributed all the places that you need. And we'll see what it can do. I don't know how, like in retrospect, I do not know how I would have done it otherwise. And if I had tried to DIY this whole thing, it would have been like me trying to build my own house. And to know me is to know that I am not handy and could not build my own house. And if I did, it would be janky and falling apart. And so the whole, like, you could DIY self-publish like a digital stuff, no problem. And I know there's authors who do that. If you want the physical book, I was very, very grateful to have professional help and counseling and people who could bring me through that and help me navigate Amazon. And I now have friends who have published digital only stuff. And unless you have your audience trained for that, I think it's a huge miss to publish a digital only. There's a big, like, it's not I don't know if it's tradition or prestige or what, but like people gift physical books. They take photos of physical books. They hand each other physical books. They put them on shelves. They remember them. They leave them out on their bedside table. Like if you are an author who takes your book seriously and you want it to be sort of an evergreen thing, my advice is like, and this doesn't apply to every author or every strategy, but like, please very heavily consider doing a physical version. It's not that hard in this day and age, and it's easy to assume that you would have, just like, well, half the sales are ebook, so I'll still get all the sales ebook that I would get if I just didn't have a print version. No, I think they are. I think they're synergistic, and they multiply each other. And I think you'll have more sales of your book overall if you have all the versions available. back to the word of mouth, people selling to each other kind of thing. Like you want that maximum surface area to kind of let that wave continue.
So I did a training for these new authors I'm working with to kind of just explain traditional, what it's like. I've worked as a ghostwriter on about 12 books. I gave away my first book for free as well. If you go listen to my brockswinson.com, the audiobook and the real and the digital book are free on there for anyone who wants it. And that got me like thousands of readers where I had none before, you know.
Yeah.
Um, but I like to think of it. I came up with this term kind of just for this presentation called crescendo publishing. I like the idea that I want to do a mini launch and hit some numbers, but I'm more concerned with can I sell more books next month than this month and word of
Yes.
mouth and everything else. Tell me a little bit more about the thinking of doing the free giveaway. I think Tim Ferriss did something like maybe with the chef book where he like leaked it on torrent sites on purpose and stuff like that. So
Oh,
what are some of the thoughts behind that?
I don't know. I don't know that Tim Ferriss story. I'd be a little surprised by that, but maybe that's true. No, I think it was. I think it was Naval's way of ensuring that it was like a project for the greater good, not accidentally issuing me some like insane, copyright monopoly over his greatest ideas, right? Like, um, I think it is also turned out to be an incredible like logistical benefit. It really, talking about that surface area, like it really increases that surface area of people willing to talk about it. It increases the number of people who try it and like read a few chapters or even read the whole thing and then say, oh my God, I loved it. I need the physical version. Like I want to look at it all the time. I want to have a physical version. Um, that created a lot, but I also, there's ideas in the book, that, Naval talks about, if they read it, if they wrote it to make money, don't read it. A heuristic for selection of books. And similarly, like, anybody who's trying to sell you a get rich quick scheme is like just trying to get rich off of you. Like those don't exist. Avoid them. And so I think that policy was also in part just a really intentional way to avoid that kind of trap of, um, having conflicting messages and like these are foundational principles for a bunch of people to live on. So like have a positive sum mindset, to seek leverage, to create wealth, to take accountability for your actions and your work, to try to build equity in a business or buy it where you can. Like these are universal principles that can really help people, help lift them up no matter where they are. And I don't feel great about like gatekeeping that for, $3 US. That might be a lot of money to people, when you travel abroad or whatever, or just the accessibility. Like as soon as you publish a book, you immediate like DMs and reply floods of like, why can't I get it in X country, in X language, in X format? And it was genuinely like, I appreciate it as an author who cares about the reader's experience to just be like, it's on the website. Like if you want to read it, just go read it. Like I'm sorry I can't like have it perfectly distributed globally, like worldwide, especially on day one. But I want you to have this information. Genuinely, I do. Like, please go read it. Um, and I just feel good about that. Like I earn plenty of money. Um, like it has not, I don't think, changed my livelihood for the worse. Maybe as for the better, but I feel great about the work that I do and the legacy that I can leave and sharing these ideas. And I wouldn't be like dedicating thousands of hours of my life to building these books if I didn't think they were good for humanity and good for the people reading it. And so it feels good to be able to share that maximally. And even if I knew I was giving up 5x financial upside for being able to have that impact and reach 10 times more people, I would do it.
We're coming up close on time. I got maybe 2 or 3 more. We'll kinda see where we're at.
Bring it on.
Was there any point in the beginning of the 3 years when you didn't know it was gonna be 3 years that you felt a rush, the whole, like, strike when the iron is hot, I've got this green light, I can pump this thing out in 6 months? How did you avoid that?
Oh my God, dude. Yeah. Especially when, I mean, Naval was like really hot around this time and like increasing popularity aggressively. And I remember my blood boiling when because this is a public project, right? Like I was clear that I was working on it, and people were like, "Where is it? Like, where is it?" It's been a year, and I was like, "Do you know how hard I'm working on this, and like what my quality bar is, and how like one, do you know how far I am from being done? So if you're mad about a year, like just buckle up because it's going to be a minute." Um, and like it didn't upset me that people were eager for it. It upset me when there was a few people who were like, "You're taking too long. Screw you. I'm going to do it myself." And I was like, "Bitch, what? Like, go for it. Like, come at me, bro. Like, like you think you're going to do this faster and better? Like, I don't think so." Um, and I'm competitive that way. So like I, that lit a fire in me.
Naval knighted you. He's not like there's not a line behind you that he's looking at. Is what I would think,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. But I also like, and look, I mean, my wiser perspective on that now is like 20 different people could write Naval books and they would all come out very differently. And like that, going back to where we started, right? Like curation is creation is just as important. People are going to curate very differently. They're going to optimize for different things. They're going to be attracted to different things. They're going to edit differently. They're going to organize differently. They're going to emphasize different themes. Like you could write a Naval book tomorrow that would land very differently and it might appeal to different people. And that would probably be good for the world too. So like I'm a little less protective of it now, and a little less crazy. Um, but yeah, it is a real thing to like feel impatient, especially when you know you're onto something. And I'm always eager. Like I'm now eager for my next book to come out, and like I'm impatient with myself to like put more hours into it and work a little faster and work a little harder and get it out. And I think there's a degree to which that's healthy, um, as long as. And I tell people this all the time. It's one of my like favorite things. Is like when you look back in 10 years or 20 years at this day or this week or this month, the only thing that may turn out to matter about it is that you didn't quit. So like whatever is a healthy mindset for you to be in wherever, whatever else is going on in your life, to just not quit permanently today. Like don't quit today, don't quit tomorrow, take it one day at a time and just keep moving. Um, that mindset for me helped me through all manner of like various psychological challenges, right? Because you go through like, oh my God, I need to go faster. The world is like moving too quick and I'm not ready yet. Then you go into like, oh, the book isn't good enough yet. Then you go into it'll never be good enough. Then I'm not good enough. Then like there's a people think, and I get this question all the time, how did you decide to write the book? Like when did you decide? It's like writing a book is not one decision. It is a million decisions to continue. And you have to employ all manner of like tricks to get you to make a million decisions to keep writing and keep going and just and some days it's not even keep writing, some days it's just not quit, not decide to quit. um, so knowing that going in and remembering that like this is like a stay in the game has been really helpful for me.
I interviewed a screenwriter and they were talking about how do you make it in Hollywood, and the advice is don't quit, don't die, and the rest of it just kind of works out. So,
Yeah.
last question, possibly. We've sprinkled all the breadcrumbs, but I got your email a few weeks ago. You're now the CEO of Scribe. It still feels kind of a wild story. How did that happen? And then were you tempted just to be an author as opposed to also have this professional job? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, man, this is a wild story. I don't know. You tell me how much time we have for the whole thing, but like, all right. So like I said, I published my first book with Scribe. Tucker helped. The team was amazing. I loved everybody I worked with there. I was kind of halfway through working with them to publish my second book. Easy decision. Loved them. Was having a great experience, and I started to hear whispers from like author friends of mine that like, and the rumor right away was like Scribe shut down, and I was like, no fucking way, like no way, I don't believe you. And so but I kept hearing it, and so I called the CEO. I was like, dude, what is going on? And he's like, well, we run into some financial trouble. Um, the bank is like forcing a sale for closing on us. I don't remember the exact like technical term, but basically like the bank wants their money. And so what turned out to happen was the bank foreclosed. The Scribe Media LLC, which was the version of the company that I had worked with so far, was started going through a bankruptcy process. And over the years, I've read a bunch of books and have some friends who work in private equity and permanent equity and have holding companies. And so I was like, this is a company that I love, that seems like it should be making money, that I'm a very happy customer of, that I can't imagine how to be an author without. I think I would like to make some phone calls and see what we can do about this. So I'm not one to take a blow like that lying down. So I called some friends, and one of them was like, "This is interesting. Like, we're gonna take a look at this." So they flew to Austin, started due diligence, signed a letter of intent, and wound up buying a good amount of the assets of the company. So they bought the brand essentially from the bank when the bank had like claimed all of the assets of the company. And they, to their credit, extended offers before that was even done, extended offers to the remaining team, some of them, to bring them on. And so kind of took this risk capital to keep taking care of authors through this like nasty bankruptcy process. And it's painful. And a lot of people, a lot of authors were owed work, and the team did not get treated well on the way out. And it was very poor management, kind of all around by the previous ownership. But the foundation of this company and the team that's there is awesome and passionate about authors. And, I was just glad that I'd be able to keep writing books and using Scribe. And, then these guys who bought the assets and started this thing back up called me and were like, "We've been thinking about it, and we need somebody to lead this company, and we think it should be you. You've been an author, you understand the industry, like you will be able to work with other authors and bring them along. The team really likes you, and you brought us the deal in the first place, and you've got like the operating background. We think you should do it." And I was like, "Guys, I cannot tell you how happy I am to just be sitting and writing books and just like having an empty calendar. And I can't tell you how delighted my wife is to have me like as her personal caterer every day. So like, I'm going to have to think hard about this, but like, don't get your hopes up." And we thought long and hard about it. And I couldn't bear to see it done poorly. I'm so eager to see what this next generation of publishing is going to look like. And I think that Scribe hit on the model that is the most author friendly and that really respects the context that publishing operates in now, which is books are largely talked about and sold and communicated about on social media. Amazon makes it really easy for anybody to publish. Print on demand makes it incredibly easy. And there's no centralized sort of, there's not nearly as much need for upfront capital for huge print runs. There's not nearly as much need for political connections around centralized media. And like those endorsements mean so much less than they used to. I think just the whole context has changed around traditional publishing, and this model that gives authors full creative control and full financial upside of their work is a huge, huge improvement in innovation. And that is kind of what we do. And I'm really proud to be able to offer people that. And there's a million reasons to write a book. Some people just want to have an impact. And they're like, if I save one person from committing suicide, this will be worth the time and effort and money I invest in creating this book. Some people, use it as a tool to grow their business. And they say, I'm going to give away every copy of this book that I can, and it's going to bring me millions of dollars in consulting services or software sales or whatever it is. Or there's people like, me or David Goggins who are like, I think this book is going to sell a lot of copies, and I want I want to make that bet. I want to take the upside downside risk of my life's work. And I want to work with somebody who respects that and will still do great work to help me put the best version of it out into the world. So I'm a few months into that job now, and the team is tenured and working hard, and we're bringing in great new authors, and I'm having a ton of fun, like meeting everybody who wants to write a book in and outside my network, and like brainstorming and positioning and just helping people like navigate the confusing world of publishing for the first time. Um, but I'm really excited to see where we can get over 5 or 10 years. And I feel like I get to kind of pay forward the favor that Tucker did me when I was just like a lost dude with a Google Doc, like tweeting about having finished a manuscript, right? Like he really helped me publish this book that changed my life. And now I get to do the same for others. And I'm very grateful for that.
That was amazing. I really appreciate you just taking an hour with me and your really thoughtful answers. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for giving the space to have this conversation, man. I love when writers get to talk writing and talk shop and share secrets.
Yeah.
I'm excited to go. I have a really like deep curiosity for screenwriting in the movie business. I don't understand it at all, but I'm fascinated by it. Like I'm gonna go dive into a lot of these old episodes. It holds such romance for me. I'm really excited to learn more.
Cool. Yeah, I appreciate that.